The Trailblazers experience is back, and I'm so glad to welcome our next guest, Fiona. We recorded this a few months ago, and one of the things that resonated with me, she was talking about how in life, whatever you're going through, it's not about rejection, it's about redirection. And a really healthy conversation about how you can build your personal brand and take every opportunity as an opportunity to learn and just do some amazing things. So please enjoy this episode. Welcome to another episode of the Trailblazers Experience podcast, where we have candid conversations with women sharing their career journeys. Today's guest is no different in terms of Fiona Lambert. She's a speaker, a coach, an author, and a radiant force behind 2 books that she's written so far. She has decades of experience in fashion and leadership, has become a powerful force for women over 60, proving that there's no limitation but a launch pad to what she can do. I mean, just before we started the podcast, we were talking about her being the president of the 20 Club, which is one of the leading private members clubs in terms of retail in the UK. And she's done it with so much dignity and elegance and just care that, I've really enjoyed just watching her in that position. But without further ado, welcome, Fiona.
What a fabulous intro. Thank you very much.
I had gone to the OMR festival in Hamburg, and they always talk about what are the trends, what are the things that we've seen in the industry. So one of the things they said is brands building, community-led brand building is very big, but also the surge of influencers who are 60 over, and they are killing it in terms of confidence, their point of view, what they're doing in their lives, and just owning it. So I feel like you're the cusp, of the things that you've done with your fitness and the books that you've written with completely 2 different things. One is fitness, the other one is, about dating. Where do we even start about how did you get to this point in your life where owning who you are has just become, I think, a priority, and it's showing?
Thank you. Well, gosh, do you know, it's a really rich theme to talk about. As you mentioned, I had a long career in fashion, which I absolutely loved. I'd wanted to go into fashion from age 11. I studied as a designer and pattern cutter, and was very fortunate to start at Next in the early days, and then went on to form Georgia Asda with the founder, and then, worked in fashion very successfully at board level until I was coming up to 60 and I got made redundant. And I, at the time, thought, I've done such amazing roles, which I'd love doing, but I felt like any other version of the role would just be a bit deja vu, and I like a new challenge. And as I was approaching 60, I didn't like the sound of saying it. And I thought, this isn't right. Why is it as a woman that saying you're 60 feels old? And it is because of the sort of society's pressure, but I guess it sort of must have been something internal. So I decided to, it's a bit of a challenge from my PT, actually. He said, let's get you to your fittest for your 60th. And I thought, well, I love an audacious goal. Why not? And sort of prove to myself and to society that actually 60 is no barrier to you becoming the best you can be in, I suppose, not only physically, it transpired mentally as well. And I think it's interesting you talked about, so many influencers coming up and, sort of through the ranks in later life. The confidence you gain as you get older, and I guess caring less what people think. And I've recently learned this is hormonal. I don't know if you realize that apparently our drop in estrogen makes you a nester build and be a sort of more a people pleaser and a bit more amenable. Whereas your drop in estrogen, and I guess, that's why a lot of this women are becoming quite feisty, means, you care less what people think and have the confidence to stand your ground, represent yourself. And, and as I've started doing that more and more and come out of a corporate career, and I guess I've become the brand, being able to speak on behalf of other women, hopefully inspire other women to try to get fitter, to be able to be more confident in being themselves and not sort of feel like sheep herded in in a direction. I think it's a really powerful age to be, and a really powerful moment actually to be able to be heard.
I mean, you've definitely had a remarkable career in fashion and leadership, and everybody else check out her LinkedIn, all the things that she's talked about. Next, we see where it is now, starting at Georgia Asda. It just goes on and on as well. But do you think if you hadn't been made redundant, this pivot wouldn't have happened? You would have still be on that trajectory of, climbing up the ladder even further in terms of that career?
Yeah, I probably would have. As I said, I love the role. And I've been very fortunate to turn around a lot of brands. I guess that's what I was, always known for. And because I think I, again, probably didn't follow the crowd and was a bit of a maverick, but would, be brought in to really focus on the customer and the product and create something that felt new versus just following the old format. So I loved it. And I think it's interesting. I often say, redundancy is often a turning point for people. And I guess you could, a lot of people would, and certainly, being made redundant at 59, feel like that's a bit like I've got to lie down and, have a cup of tea and just sort of take a deep breath and, maybe see that as a bit of the beginning and the end. And I guess because I had this in my head that I didn't want to see 60 as old, I wanted to see it as a beginning instead. And funny enough, actually, my next book, it might not be a book, it might be a series of articles, is along the lines of the power of no and the joy of yes. Because actually what has happened since then is I've said no more to things that don't really fill my purpose of actually, creating joy and creating things people enjoy and, hopefully, generating happiness. I mean, that is, you watch me actually, I do like making experiences and things great for people, whether it's coaching people or creating experiences or creating social media content. And so saying no to things that don't really fit that purpose, or also toxic friendships or, job opportunities that actually you might just have taken in the past because you felt you needed to. So saying no more off that power of no, but also the joy of yes. So I have done all sorts of things I never expected to because I was challenged to get to my fittest, and we pitched the story to Women's Health, and actually they just didn't take it. But a Times journalist worked with my PT, and he said, actually, I think the Times would be really interested. And they picked up the story, and the next thing I knew, I was a cover girl on the weekend section of the Times. And then because of that, I was asked to write a book. I'd never written a book before, but I thought, well, I enjoy writing. I like creating content. I'm very visual, so I could imagine what the book looked like with very clear instructions of how to do the exercises. I used all of my business experience and brand building to create a structure that meant you get in the right mindset first, because 90% of it, be able to stick to a program, is getting yourself in the right mindset first. So, wrote the first book. My marriage also ended at 60 as well. And I started dating again at 61, which again was a bit of a new challenge, but realized when I started doing it just how much the world had changed since I dated in my 80s, and realized that there was not only a sort of self-help manual, but also a bunch of stories to share that could help other women. And I think I've just been really open to new challenging experiences, and I've learned and grown. And each time I do something, you can almost be assured that another couple of doors open. So I'm a big believer in the power of no and the joy of yes.
Do you know what you've said? There's so many nuggets to unpack there. I just love the fact that a challenge from your PT is what sort of was a little bit of a turning point, a push to say, oh, you know what, I'm going to do something different. And you were open to doing something different, which has probably led to all these opportunities.
It has.
And I always say a quote, it's Oprah. She's been talking about it quite a lot as well, about how once you open yourself up to the universe of what can be, everything else falls into place. And then you see your circle changes in terms of who are supporting you really, in that direction. And also in terms of betting on yourself. And Agreed talks about this. Once you start to say, well, you know what, I need to bet on myself more, everything falls into line. You know what to say no to? You say, actually, I don't want to do this anymore. And you move into things that are calling. So let's talk about Invincible. I mean, I just think it's amazing in terms of, I'm 44, I'll be 45 in February. And I have started now in my North Star, accepting obviously that I'm getting older, but positioning myself with what good looks like at 45, 50, 55, 60, 65. And it's actually new to see all these confident women coming out of the woodworks. So what does it mean to be invincible to you, and how do you help women tap into that energy?
After you've picked up on something interesting there, one of the things I feel, I think you should feel proud of it. One of the things I feel most proud of is the number of younger women actually who come up to me and go, "You've suddenly made me realise 60 isn't old."
Yes.
And a lovely lady came up to me at an event I was at last week, and she said, "You probably don't realise, how many people you're inspiring as they're approaching 60, and particularly if they've had, big careers." A lot of people will be thinking the what next. And hopefully I'm proving there's a lot of what next.
Yeah.
It's, whether it is climbing Kilimanjaro or I'm dancing actually in a strictly come dancing type thing for
We're
charity.
manifesting this,
Yeah,
manifesting you
next
getting
Saturday,
on
and next
quickly.
Saturday. Yeah, so I've accepted that challenge as well, and the cha-cha-cha from scratch. Yeah, that, just making sure that nobody feels like turning 60 is the end. So I think the feeling invincible versus invisible for me was just a bit of a two fingers up to society, whether it is how marketing is done. I worked in the fashion industry for a long time, and it is so rare for fashion brands to use older models. And I think it is often because young women can't imagine being old. So if you want, show a product on an older person, they can't imagine wearing it. Whereas, we've all been younger, so you can almost picture it doesn't really, it kind of doesn't matter. But I think it's important to be a role model out there to go, we've got lots of spending power, we've got opinions, we can walk with our feet to the brands or the companies that represent us well. So I think it's really, really important to be out there as a role model, and not let the sort of pressure from society, as I said, whether it is marketing, how people talk to you, the mansplaining that you get. Prove that you can be invincible versus invisible.
And it's actually a good realization, because that shapes how you deal with whether it's marriage or divorce or career pivots or even decision making of, do I want to take this next step in this company, or do I need to move on to this other one, or what are the stages that I do? I've noticed by speaking to so many women with the podcast is everyone's had that moment where they've realized, okay, what does good look to me? And how do I represent myself with that? And just having the courage, isn't it, to say, actually, being invincible means I can do anything in any particular point in my life as well.
I mean, it's interesting because I've got a bit of a hat trick. I've been made redundant 3 times. The first time I chose redundancy, the second time was with COVID, and then the third time was this sort of restructure due to the huge cutbacks because of the war between Russia and Ukraine. And definitely the first time, and it helped me through the second and third time. I realised I had to realise, and it took me about 8 months, 9 months to a year to realise it, that there was more to me than my job. And I do think a lot of, people, and particularly with, big roles, have a lot of their self-esteem caught up in the person they are at work.
They let it
And
define them, isn't it?
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely that. Whether it's, through redundancy or, and I guess, as they're approaching, getting older or retirement age, the realization that what are they outside of work and the who am I is quite a big question that people start to think. And I think I was very fortunate in some ways, that I experienced redundancy, and it was very humbling at the time because you suddenly realize that, well, you have to realize there is more to you than your role. I'd had a very successful career. I thought I'd walk into another job. You don't, and it was good for me to learn, about myself and about, what strengths I've got. And I guess having a purpose that is bigger than just being successful at your job. I think it's quite interesting for women to be able to have a think about what is their purpose, full stop, in life really, because I think that helps you, as you mentioned, having a North Star. I think, having a clear purpose about what really motivates you gives you a North Star.
Yeah, I think redundancy, honestly, having also experienced that as well, has been one of those where I said, okay, what do I want to focus on before we get back into the rat race of, building brands and being commercial and all the other things. What is it I'm genuinely interested in? And fitness has always been a very big part. So doubling down on that and creating milestones. And I think you're right. It's taking that as a win and pivoting it to say, right, what does this mean to me and how can I move forward? So it's good to have this honest conversation so that people can say, right, it's not the end, it's actually the beginning of
Mm.
something new and something fruitful and something purposeful. How do you want to turn this around?
Well, it's interesting because there is an analogy to dating. Because I think the second book I wrote, which was SAS 60 and Single: Your Survival Guide to Dating, the first bit was about really. I had to relearn how to be single, and I wish I had read my book before I started dating again.
Love
Because
it.
yeah, well, I'd been married for 31 years and with my husband for 37, so it was a long time since I'd been dating. You don't realize how much you've, I don't know whether it's bent yourself out of shape or over, compromised on things, and you become half of a couple instead of a person. And so I did have to, relearn how to be single before I started dating. But there was a great line which I think applies to both situations, that it's not rejection, it's a redirection. So I think that's a great way, whether it's, being made redundant or, coming to end of a career and deciding what you want to do, or finding yourself single again, accept actually that it's not rejection, it's a redirection.
I mean, let's talk about that. SAS 60 and Single. And I remember when you told me last year saying, I'm writing a second book, and I'm thinking, okay, it's Invincible 2.0. We're continuing on this trajectory. And you say, no, this is what it's going to be about. And we've spoken to a few people, isn't it? And they were like, oh my God, this book is so necessary. These are the experiences I've had. And it's really bold. It's refreshing. I don't think you need to be 60 to read it, because a lot of
No,
the
no,
things
I
in
hope
there are
it's
just
relevant to lots of people.
applicable.
Yeah.
Just a refreshing take on it. And you describe yourself as a rogue heroine navigating that modern dating world. What surprised you most about re-entering the dating scene at 60?
Gosh, well, whether it's 60 or not, I think definitely as you get older, and maybe it's to do with, as I said, it's this less, you're less tolerant, less compromised. I do think you're certainly more selective, and I think not as likely to settle. So I saw again a fabulous analogy. They said when you're in your 20s and you're dating, of course, 95% of people are single and you haven't got much baggage. So you've got this huge ocean of potential dates out there waiting for you. If you find yourself single, I'm going to say 50 and over, they said it's sort of, you've got this primordial soup left.
The rest.
Which is kind of, because a lot of people are, they've either, they are still, people are married, so there's less choice. There's a lot of people with a lot of baggage, so it becomes, much, I think you're going to end up going, kissing a lot more frogs, which, I think being prepared for that. And I think the book, in the book, I do talk about how to try to sift through, well, be happy in yourself first and actually work out what you want from your next relationship before you even embark on it. So you don't end up necessarily going for a repeat of your previous relationship that didn't work. How do you then write a profile that hopefully attracts the right people? But then how do you sift through lots of potential suitors who might not be right? And how do you edit that down, whether it is through, the right questions, doing a video call, what to try and work out from on a first, I wouldn't call it a date, I'll call it a meeting. It makes it far less pressure.
I'm not treating it like a job interview.
Yeah, exactly. Well, actually, that is quite funny because in my profile, I said I wanted to meet somebody interested and interesting, and I had a bit of a 3-question rule that I'm curious about people, and I wanted to find out if somebody was worth going on a date with. So I'd ask very, I suppose, questions relating to their profile. So it wasn't kind of cut and paste. It would be something very, very relevant to their profile. And the number of sort of one-word answers I get. So then I'd ask a second question and get another one-word answer back. If I had to ask a third question and didn't get a question back about myself, I'm afraid it was a no from me because, having somebody that's, curious for me is really important, in the same, as I said, interested and interesting. It was, but it was funny. I did actually comment, I thought, rather than just reject somebody outright, I said, you're probably not for me. I said, I've been asking you a few questions. I noticed you've not asked me anything. And he said, I thought you were interrogating me. So,
so that was even you giving them a fourth
date that was never going to happen. But when you said it felt like a job interview, clearly somebody felt like, they were going through a job interview.
Yeah, I love the fact of how you're blending personal stories, a bit of insights, humor. I think why was it important for you to keep in this book the tone honest but light?
Well, it was for both of them actually, because people have a lot of choice about where they spend their money. And, I'm sure there's lots of books out there on relationships. There's lots of books out there on fitness. My take has always been authentic. I'd like to think I've done it with I've done my roles with kindness and humor. People might go, she's firm but fair, but most people have had, enjoyed working with them. I'd like notes on anonymous notes if they haven't. But no, I generally, I've always wanted all my team to be the best they can be. So I think I wanted to make sure that I wrote in a tone that was very personal and authentic, that it was easy reading, because people have got so much, to distract them, whether it's social media or TV or the radio or podcasts. So, something that could be done easily digested in short chunks. It was important to me to make it sort of very palatable and attainable for both the dating and the fitness book. And I think, that I wanted it to be a true representation of me, that, want to read more of it, hopefully, rather than put you off, either the fitness or the dating. And I think both, hopefully some, enough in them, they've got little worksheets in them to help you, whether, in the first book, it's, about helping you find a purpose that is strong enough to keep you motivated when you're on a fitness journey. And the second book is about how do you love yourself first before you put yourself back on the dating market, because I think a lot of people will come out of relationships with, with a lot of baggage, or with a lot, with some of the ego bruised as well. And so for me, it was really important to have these little worksheets in and make it interactive, so that it's not me lecturing people. They're actually having a little think about themselves as well.
Just like going 360, I feel like there's a lot of things that especially women in their careers can take from that as well, isn't it? The same principles apply. What leadership lessons, having had these amazing roles at Next as the Danelle Yeager, from that, what is guiding you today? The lessons that you learned then are helping you now, or have you reinvented yourself in a completely different way?
I think the thing that was important for me, I think, in the roles and why I was successful is you do think of the customer first.
Mhm.
And you walk in their shoes, because again, they've got plenty of choices about where they can go and spend their money. So I think in both books, I thought about the person reading the book and, the end customer of the book. And they've got to buy into you. They've got to buy into the process. So I think definitely the skill of thinking about the customer first was really important. And I think, you talked about trends at the beginning, clearly a career in fashion and home, which is what I had. And working on the direction for those the ranges meant that I had to know what trends were. And as I mentioned, making sure that, that there was a personal note to it, and also that it was approachable, bite-sized chunks, because, the way people are given information now is much more smaller and bite-sized chunks. So I suppose using the knowledge of trends, of just how people are thinking, how people are shopping, how people are reading, was something I used in both books as well.
A lot of the things when I'm interviewing women is also asking them how do they, and I don't want to use the word work-life balance, because balance is whatever you make it, whatever works for you. But there is a trend, and a positive one, of women, actually even men, being very positive about transforming your body and your mindset, and
Mm.
putting, self-care at the
Hmm.
beginning. What are some go-to practices that help you stay grounded? Because you are busy. I mean, you are booked and busy. You are doing lots of
Mm.
things. But what are things that you can just share that help keep you grounded, energized, and how do you define confidence? Because we want women to cultivate
Mm.
it at any age and not wait until they've hit that point. If they can start young and it just builds on, that's really important as well.
Yes, although there's quite a lot to unpack in that question. From a health point of view, there is no silver bullet. I always, and for me, the mindset piece was important, that people don't think this is, a diet I'm going on.
Mm.
If you change your nutrition, it becomes a lifestyle. And particularly, as you get older, for a woman in particular, maintaining your muscle mass. So whether it's doing more resistance training and eating more protein, just become things that you should do for your lifestyle. So, that point of for health and fitness. Oh, it is very sad, but the drinking 2 litres of water, walking 10,000 steps. And I actually find walking incredibly meditative as well. I think, choosing to walk places and actually being observant and taking things in and, being out in nature as much as possible, I think is really important for me. I do think I learnt during some of my more stressful times at work the importance of gratitude for both small things and big things. So I think that's something that has become a habit. I think I talk about in the book, actually, the 2190 rule, which is it takes 21 days if you have got a habit you want to change to break it, but you have to replace it with a good habit. And if you can do that for 90 days, it does become a lifestyle. And I think being grateful, it's a really good practice to think at night time if what you're grateful for that day. And if you've got something you can talk about it, or if you write it down, there's lots of studies that show that actually, that feeling grateful and working out what not that you're happy with your lot, because I guess, I'm certainly one of those people who's restless but it's not like I'm looking for material things now. I'm looking for experiences or, look at ways to, share community or share information. So I think gratitude is a really important thing.
I mean, you've just hit the nail on the head, isn't it? It's focusing on those small wins, no matter what they are. And if it starts with just taking a walk, the gratitude journal, it really just makes a difference. And I've seen really visibly, even for myself, just walking or going to the gym or having a routine is really
Yeah.
key just to keep
I do.
me
And
sane.
the other thing, actually, again, I talk about it in both books, though, the language you use talking to yourself.
Mm,
I always think, people, it's often said, it's not a new line, but you should talk to yourself as you would your best friend.
yeah.
I do think we're often our own worst critics, and, rephrasing can't to can, and, all sorts of things like that. I do think, using affirmative language with yourself really works. And, whether it's talking to yourself in the mirror or congratulating on, small thing you've achieved, momentum breeds momentum in that.
Yeah.
Um, so definitely silencing the inner critic and turning it into an internal cheerleader. I'd encourage everybody to do that. And you mentioned confidence. I think that really does build confidence.
What role does storytelling play in your work? I mean, even now, you're such a good storyteller with all the, examples that you're giving. And how can women use their own stories to reclaim their power? I think it's such an important topic to bring on, especially as we see women in the workforce or rising in positions. We want them to have that confidence wherever they are to be the
Mm.
best version of themselves.
It was interesting. You don't realise, I gave an analogy the other day, actually, that when you're having climbed a couple of mountains, when you're at the bottom looking up, you look at the mountain, you go, wow, that is a long way to go up there. And it is just a step at a time, a step at a time, and a step at a time. And when you're sort of halfway up and you look down, I remember doing that and thinking, gosh, I'm the person that was down there looking up. And you don't realize how much you're inspiring the people who are down there, because they're looking at you going, well, they've done it, So I think for me, making your journey or sharing your journey is really important. I think often for junior people, I remember them looking at me as a director and, they couldn't believe that I started life as a designer and pattern cutter. In the old days, you used to do, paper filing versus filing everything on a laptop, and photocopying and things like that. And they forget that you've done those hard yards to get there. And, you have worked through roles and you've probably had to, deal with appraisals that went well or didn't go well or gave you some feedback, and you keep going, and it is, step by step by step by step by step. And actually that gets to you to where you are. So I think that it's really important when you talked about storytelling to share the journey, because that suddenly makes, your progression in a career available and approachable and attainable for the people who are looking at you going, gosh, I'm never going to do that, or I could never achieve that. And they go, oh yeah, actually I can. It's, they've suddenly seen the path up the mountain.
I think it's a lot of the time also realizing that you've got a wealth of knowledge to offer as well. When somebody says, oh, what do you think about this? I've been working a lot with female founders who are late 20s, and they'll ask us things such as, operational efficiency or how do you expand into a new market? I'm like, You just need to do A, B, C, D. And they're like, oh my God, we never thought of that.
Yeah,
You
you're
are
right.
such a well of knowledge. I'm like, oh my goodness, this is the
Yeah,
stage we're getting to. But it's sharing those things that
it
is
is.
really important as well. Um,
But I think it's important. You're very generous with your time and very generous with your advice. I'd like to think I'm the same as well. And it's a virtuous circle though, because I guess the same people will do it for other people
yeah,
because
start paying it forward.
I remember the people who were kind to me and supported me, and I always make sure I stay in touch with them. I think it's really important to remember and be grateful for those people. So, and people will do the same for us. And I think, they'll go on to help others because it's a generosity that spills over.
Yeah, I think paying it forward, that's a thing I learned a long time ago. I pay it forward without expecting anything returned because it's also the right thing to do and not saying, "Oh, I helped you, but, no, it's actually I'm helping you because I think you just need the help. If you need a door
Mm,
opening or a connection on an email or, invited to an event as my plus one, I pay it forward because people have done
yeah.
it for me and they've not expected anything in return and I'm paying it forward as well. And it's just lovely to see
Yeah.
you can open a door for someone and let's break
Well, I
through.
think you mentioned at the beginning, it's quite interesting because I had very big roles
Mm,
in businesses, and I now self-employed as an author and a content creator. And the people it divides people. Work out the people who only stayed in touch with you because you were in a position of influence, and the
yes.
people who are really there for you. So, and I think part of the power of no is realizing who those are and actually not caring about it,
Mhm.
and going, it's okay to let that go.
Yeah, I mean, your circle does not have to keep expanding. It has to keep evolving, and
Mm,
the quality needs to just keep improving, I think, as as you're navigating. But
yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's
Well,
an impactful
it's
one.
very true that was it when they say people are in your life for a season, a reason, or a life. So I think
Exactly. And that's okay. And that's okay
that's
as
okay.
well. Now, Fiona, you've written 2 books. Strictly is on the cards there. You're building a movement. You're inspiring thousands. What's next for you, personally, professionally? Are they some things that you're setting in your sights?
Gosh, I think it was interesting because I always had these things planned, and then a sort of new goal. And I was sitting there going, I've got my Strictly Dance thing next weekend, and I was thinking, the kind of what next. From a travel point of view, I want to have things to look forward to because I'm trying to work my way around the 7 wonders of the world. I'm likely to do Machu Picchu next year. I do enjoy communication and talking to people. And I was on very recently, which was a fabulous opportunity to be on Lorraine, number one, talking about my book, but also doing some fashion presenting. And I really enjoy, sharing knowledge. I may or may not write another book, but actually I do quite enjoy the medium of whether it is TV, but equally, I think I might start doing my own YouTube on doing presenting on, fashion, particularly, Barry, I was saying the lack of people who talk to people of women, women over 50, focusing on that. So I might start doing my own content creation on presenting on fashion for the over 50s on YouTube. So that's my current train of thought. Now I've said it, I've got to do it. You see,
Oh,
that's I'm a
well,
bit.
this is it. You've now spoken it into existence. Look, YouTube and long form content is really the way forward because people genuinely want to learn about something. I was talking to a guy, Trendy Granddad. He said on YouTube, you're either there to educate or to entertain. So pick your lane and then do it
Mm,
really well is really key. And for those who it's the first time tuning in, you've never seen Fiona. I mean, she wears some amazing outfits in terms of fashionable. She is. There's one gold dress I still remember that you wore. She's on there. So this is not just someone saying, I know about fashion. She's really into it as well. So that's exciting.
yeah, no, well, I will let you know. I'll send you the link as soon as it's recorded.
Now let's talk about legacy. I mean, you've done so much. You're such an inspiration, and whether it's online or offline, that's the power of social and digital. You are touching people in a good way that you probably didn't even realize. Let's talk about your legacy and what you think that's going to be then, because now you're in the next chapter.
Well, isn't it funny? Because I having had this pivot, it's really interesting. And I think if you'd have asked me 2.5 years ago, I would have liked to, I was known for turning around brands, but also bringing on people, and so, my passion for product and for people, I would like to be remembered for that. And certainly, supporting UK manufacturing, which I was very passionate about, trying to bring UK manufacturing back. And all of those probably still stand. But I think it has become a bit of a purpose now by default now for representing women as they get older. And I do feel quite passionately that I want to be a role model for nobody to feel too many women actually, funny enough, talking on LinkedIn about the fact how hard it is to get employed, if they're out of work for any reason, sort of 55 and over. And yet we've got so much value to bring. And, whether it is how fashion brands talk to people, or I think there was a stat I saw that I think it's 25% of the population are over 60, 27% of the spend over 60, but only 4% of advertising is done on people over 60. And that probably is done a stair lift. I think it's that sort of ageism is a really important topic. So I feel more strongly now that, if I've got a legacy that goes, I changed the dynamic, or as part of a movement that changed that dynamic, I feel very proud. I also have said, I try to make the fitness part, entertaining and attainable. If I can make one woman, as who's sort of, got a bit older, maybe her children have left home, she's been herself at the bottom of the pile and thinks it's too late to start. If I can change one person's mood on that, I'll have done something that I'm really proud of.
I mean, that's just brilliant. Just coming back to talking about how you can think women also need to see themselves as a personal brand. So it's how can we help them in that second phase, or whether it's job search, how can we position them in the best way possible so that they do get in front of the panels and are not seen as throwaway. And it's really good. I think that someone is actually wants to focus on that as well, isn't it? I remember when I started the podcast, I've interviewed so many different women, and the first thing everyone says is, especially if they're not on social media of their certain age, they'll be like, oh, no, I don't think I should do this. I said, no, yes, we need your voice, your story.
Yes.
It is important. It does matter. Your experience, your achievements, they need to be, celebrated. And that's the whole purpose. And afterwards, they actually feel very, very good that they did it, because I guess it was a time of introspection and reflection as well, isn't it? And this is what I've achieved. This is what I've done. Actually, I'm badass.
Well, you're the mirror. You're holding up a mirror to someone,
Yeah.
for them to actually see themselves. So well done.
We always end the podcast asking our guests to close with the Trailblazer takeaway tips. So it could be a mantra, a mindset, piece of advice that you wish you would have known all those years ago, just to help them lead with purpose and lead boldly. What would your 3 be?
So actually, well, it's one, but it's quite applicable. So I would encourage people always to be more water. So I think I've been successful because, if you think about water, whether it's a position of strength that, if you think of waterfalls, they can power through rock. So that persistence and that strength. When they hit a rock they can't get through, or they reach lower land, they can wind their way around it. If you think about changes in temperature, it can adapt to steam or to ice and still retain itself. So I think actually for most women or people in business, let's include men as well. But I'd actually say for most people, always remember, be more water. There is a way you will get to where you need to be, and whether it's through strength, whether it's through adapting, or whether it's through perseverance. Believe you will get there and you will get to your destination.
Fiona, brilliant. Thank you so much for your story, your honesty, your humor, your heart. A friend of ours really introduced us together, isn't it? It's Billy. So I'm so happy that I met you. And I guess me being like water has driven me in that direction. You've shown really that reinvention is always possible. And to our listeners, where can they find your books?
So Most good booksellers will have it online. There is a link on fionalambert.com. I've got my website to get the books from Amazon, but most booksellers will have it online. And you will find me, if you want to see any positivity every day on fashion, fitness and fun, on Fiona Lambert Official on social media.
Awesome. So the books are Invincible, not Invisible.
Invincible, not invisible, and SAS 16.
Thank you so much, Fiona. Been a pleasure.
Absolute pleasure.
For the audience, this has been the Trailblazers Experience podcast. Please remember to follow, like, share. We are on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, or wherever you listen to your podcast. And until then, see you next time.